Michaelia Cash, thanks so much for your time this morning. What's your reaction to the result last night?
Well, last night, Andrew, we saw Australians overwhelmingly say no to Anthony Albanese's elitist Canberra-based Voice of division. Australians said no to Mr Albanese's proposal to divide this country on the basis of race and ancestry. But the important thing, as Peter Dutton clearly stated last night, is Australians did not say no to Indigenous Australians. In fact, overwhelmingly, as I have moved in particular around Western Australia, the one thing that we all have in common is that we want to see better outcomes on the ground, practical differences being made in the lives of the most marginalised in Australia. So last night, yes, overwhelmingly, Australians rejected Anthony Albanese's elitist-based Canberra Voice, and they rejected Anthony Albanese's proposal to divide this country on the basis of race and ancestry.
All right, so where does the coalition go from here? Peter Dutton's spoken about a referendum on constitutional recognition alone and has a policy of regional voices, or do they go out the window now, those suggestions, because of the emphatic nature of this result?
Well, again, as Peter said last night, you know, the last 12 months have been really traumatic for so many Australians, regardless of whether you voted yes or no last night. This was the referendum that we did not need to have. Mr Albanese put politics over what could have been a bipartisan approach towards constitutional recognition of our First Nations people. We now need to let the dust settle. But Peter last night was very, very clear. He recommitted the coalition when elected to government on a royal commission into sexual abuse in Indigenous communities. I mean, he had said that many months ago. He has seen firsthand on the ground, in particular in the Northern Territory.
Fair enough, Michaelia Cash, but my question is another referendum on constitutional recognition and regional voices, or will those ideas be dumped?
No, Andrew, we need to let the dust settle. It has been an incredibly bruising last 12 months. But what we do need to do is look at having an audit into where the money goes, because you can't spend, as a government, $30 billion a year, have it funneled out of Canberra, as Peter says, and then when it gets to, in particular, and I look at my home state of Western Australia, regional and remote communities, it is but a trickle. It is not achieving the outcomes that all of us so desperately want.
You were in government you were in government for 9 years, so where was the audit then?
Andrew, we never had Jacinta Nampijinpa Price. For the first time in Australia's history, we have someone of lived experience fronting Australia and being able to carry the conversation. And quite frankly, we now need to back Senator Jacinta Nampijinpa Price in. This is actually, quite frankly, an historic moment for Australia. We all said no, or we said no by majority, to Anthony Albanese's elitist Canberra-based Voice. We said no to the Voice of division. But what we did say yes to as Australians, front and centre to Jacinta Nampijinpa Price, is yes to making a difference in the lives of our most marginalised. And so as of today, that is exactly what we need to do. As Peter Dutton and Jacinta said last night, the first thing we need to do is an audit in relation to spending on Indigenous programs. For the first time ever, we need to know why that money is not making a difference on the ground where it so desperately needs to.
It does appear that Peter Dutton and the Coalition Party room never had any intention of supporting this referendum, did you?
I absolutely disagree with you. Peter, at the outset, had said we would take a considered approach to the referendum. He made it very clear that we could offer a bipartisan approach if the question was in relation to constitutional recognition of Indigenous Australians. But Mr Albanese, he wanted to go much further. He wanted to play politics instead of what could have been good policy. Peter, in January, wrote to the Prime Minister on behalf of all Australians, He asked 15 basic questions, Andrew, about how the voice would work. Mr Albanese still has not responded, and we have now had the referendum. It was not until April of this year that we came together as a Liberal Party room and made a formal decision to oppose the voice. It was the right decision. But at every step of the way, Peter Dutton and the Liberal Party have behaved appropriately and in a considered manner.
He never wanted the voice, did he? He never wanted the voice. I mean, you said he was willing to have constitutional recognition, but Peter Dutton never wanted the voice, really, did he?
We had always said we would take a considered approach, and it became very, very clear early on that asking Australians to divide our nation on the basis of race was the wrong thing to do. It became very clear very early on that Mr Albanese, for his signature election night policy, wanted Australians to vote on the vibe. There was never any details in relation to the voice. We took a considered approach and we came to the right decision.
All right,
and as Peter has said, though,
what is your message today to Liberals who actually supported the voice and those who didn't campaign for no, like your Senate leader, Simon Birmingham?
Well, as Peter said last night, we accept the decision of all Australians. We did have a united position in our shadow cabinet. But as of today, guess what? Australians have overwhelmingly voted no. Peter Dutton and the Liberal Party room, the coalition, we made the right decision. That decision was backed in by Australians. However, as Peter said last night, what Australians voted overwhelmingly for yesterday was making a difference on the ground in marginalised communities. So let's get up this morning and let's do that together. The result of this referendum lies squarely at the feet of Mr Albanese. This was a referendum Australia did not have to have. This was a referendum.
What do you think this result? What do you think this result means going forward for Anthony Albanese?
Well, I think Mr Albanese does need to take a very good look at why he put the country through such a divisive process. Peter called for, I called for, Jacinta called for. Many on the coalition side called for along the way Mr Albanese to just stop. As I said, this was a referendum that Mr Albanese did not have to have. You see the reports this morning coming out of the Yes 23 campaign that there were senior Yes 23 campaigners that months ago said to Mr Albanese, do not proceed down this path, but Mr Albanese chose to. So Mr Albanese is responsible squarely for putting Australians through the pain that he has done so over the last 12 months. But more than that, Andrew, he's taken his eye off the ball in relation to what was really mattering to the Australian people. And that is, of course, the cost of living crisis that has beset this country under Mr Albanese. I can tell you, Andrew, I have moved around Western Australia. Let me assure you, people were very, very angry that Mr Albanese has taken his eye off the ball in relation to the cost of living crisis.
Cash, sorry, we're nearly out of time. I just wanted to ask quickly about the situation in Israel. Now, you're a member of NSC in government. Can you explain why the opposition's been so strident in criticising Anthony Albanese for not convening one of these soon after war broke out? And how bad could this conflict get in your view?
Well, it is almost inconceivable that when you have Jewish Australians fearing for their safety, when you know that you have Australians trapped overseas in Israel, that Mr Albanese did not immediately call a meeting of the National Security Committee of Cabinet. I sat around, as you said, the National Security Committee cabinet table when we were in office. I know that we would have called one immediately. You need to understand the nature of the domestic threat level. You need to understand how you can take immediate action to de-escalate what we have now seen happening in Sydney and in Melbourne. So quite frankly, it is a complete failure of leadership on behalf of Mr Albanese. And I would hope that he has now had a meeting of the National Security Committee. But I have to say, the fact that it was not held within that first 24 hours, in fact, quite frankly, as soon as Australia became aware of what was occurring, is just a complete failure of leadership on behalf of Mr Albanese. And he should be explaining to the Australian people why it did not occur.
Shadow Attorney-General Michaelia Cash, thanks so much for your time this morning.
Great to be with you, Andrew.